And now I would like to introduce Matt White, the GM of AI at the Linux Foundation, to tell us about the model openness framework. Matt?
Thank you, David.
Thank you very much.
All right. Awesome.
Okay.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. This is my first event here, and I'm finding that there's a lot of folks with some really great accents. Unfortunately, I have a pretty monotone voice and a Canadian accent, so hopefully you can get through this. So I'm here to talk to you about to open source AI, about the model openness framework, some work that we did in the Generative AI Commons at the Linux Foundation. And I'm also the executive director of the PyTorch Foundation. So PyTorch being sort of the most prominent deep learning framework right now that underlies most contemporary models out there today, generative and discriminative as well. So, what is open AI? What is open source AI, right? There's no consistent definition. I mean, there's a company called OpenAI, and they're not even doing open. And so what we have in the market right now is a lot of folks saying, hey, we've got open source AI model. We're the best open source AI model out there. And they don't quite meet the bar or the principles behind what drives the open source definition. There's a lot of open washing by doing that, by saying, hey, we've got a great model, and it just doesn't qualify because it's got restrictions in it that limit your ability to use that model. Some of these licenses, they're fairly restrictive. Some have trigger clauses. It's a little bit hard to navigate. And a lot of new models are coming out with their own licenses, which we generally call community licenses. And those have additional restrictions in them. And then Hugging Face has about 5,000 or so new models a day that are generally fine-tuned from foundation models. And those may come with a restrictive license in the base model, the foundation model, and then in turn, somebody fine-tunes it and converts what is a restrictive Llama license into like MIT, right? And obviously you can't do that. And so there's a lot of challenges in this space right now. So just a quick glimpse of some models that have been released in the last year or so and the licenses they used. Pythia, Mistral, tend to prefer Apache 2.0. It is a good choice, but it is also a software license, open license. MIT, DeepSeek R1 was released under MIT. And then we've got these proprietary or more restrictive licenses, right? The DeepSeek V3, which is the foundation model for R1, was released under a community license. Llama 2 as well, DBRX, and others in this space. But AI is not just software, right? AI is bigger than software. And so conventional OSS licenses cover software and documentation. It's generally accepted. But there's a lot more components that go into producing a model in the deep learning space, right? So we generally know of these artifacts, they're either code, they're data, or they're documentation. And so we've identified 16 what we would call core components of the model development lifecycle. And in order to try to, I guess, clarify the muddy waters of openness right now, we've developed this model openness framework, which we released almost 9-10 months ago. What this model openness framework does is it classifies models along 3 separate classes based on the components that are released and whether those components are released with a permissive license or not. And so if it's not released with a permissive license, we basically say this is not open and doesn't qualify. But we have what we call like a minimum viable product here, right, which is the open model. So this is where you see most releases, which is the model architecture and a set of model weights. Those model weights are final parameters. And it comes with a little bit of documentation, right? A technical report, enough topical information to be able to use the model, but not to fully reproduce it, not to fully understand it and give full transparency. So then we have this intermediate stage here, which includes additional components, including training code, inference code. This provides a little bit more transparency and a little bit more of the reproducibility piece, revealing like parameters that were used to train the model. And then we've got open science. This is our, this is where we all aspire to be, right? A very detailed research paper, like 50 pages long, full data sets, descriptions of the data used, the data preprocessing code that kind of describes the data mix, like how was data pulled into the model, how was it trained, and then intermediate checkpoints, which gives you the ability to go rewind in time and resume training at some previous point or see how the model matured during its training process. So don't try and take a whole lot away from this table here. There's a lot here, but if you do take anything away from this table is that we took all these components, we distilled them down to two distinct domains. It's either in the data domain or the model domain. And then we took from there content types, right? Is it code? Is it data? Is it documentation? And then we came to some general agreement on the most acceptable set of licenses that are permissive for each of those components. So we also have the model openness tool, which we developed to make the MOF implementable or actionable. We initially started out with a manual process where we would create this mof.json file, which is basically an index file that's paired with the licenses that are in the distribution. But what we had to do from there is really we had to develop this tool to be able to automate a lot of this process. And so what happens is a model producer submits their model to the model openness tool. It generates the JSON file for them. Think of it like an SBOM. And then the output of that is there's some markdown file that is produced, and that is you would add that into your GitHub repo. And so we have this ability to evaluate models on the model openness tool. So producers can go there, evaluate their models, see what they need to do to get up in a class. And we also submit models to what do we have as our leaderboard. So we've got a model leaderboard, which basically describes, we've got several hundred models in there now, what license the model is under, what it classifies as, and what the acceptable usage is for that particular model. So there's some benefits and limitations to the MOF. Key among the benefits is really it pushes producers to adopt permissive licenses and to release more components, right? So permissive licenses that allow you to do and sort of follow the OSI for guiding principles. That allows you to use models for any purpose without restrictions effectively. And then pushing towards a release of more components, which follows sort of the open science paradigm, right? And then what it does for downstream users is it educates them on what is this, what are the permissive usages of this model? What can it be used for? What is it not acceptably? What can it not be used for? So there are some limitations in this framework. One is that it is designed around today's machine learning paradigms. So very much deep learning centric, not highly portable for potentially future modes of learning, but certainly this is something that can be adapted. Releasing data sets is always a challenge. So, folks are a little bit concerned about intellectual property. They're also concerned about privacy and PII. And so we can't really, solve that with this. We can only encourage more descriptions to be released around data sets. And then we don't address things like bias and harms because we believe those are better suited through other frameworks that are geared towards those. So if you'd like to check out the model openness tool, I've really condensed my presentation today to try and time box myself, but is it open.ai? You can read the model openness framework paper. You can experiment with the model openness tool and check out the leaderboard. And then if you would like to get further engaged, we have this generative AI Commons, which is an open community. Anyone can join it. No membership necessary. And we engage in a lot of discussions around building frameworks and policy and other sort of contemporary topics. And we look for solutions to those problems. And that's it for me today.
Thank you very much, Matt. That was great.